The World Bank says Ghana's fiscal deficits will remain elevated from 2023 to 2025. According to its April 2023 Africa Pulse report, the large deficit is expected to be compounded by severe financing constraints resulting from a limited ability to issue long-term domestic debt and a lack of access to international capital markets. The report, however, said that the successful agreement and implementation of an International Monetary Fund supported program would help contain the deficit and provide the necessary financing, including via the ongoing debt restructuring negotiations. Aside from the IMF, Ghana has also approached the G20 for help, but has made little progress with its bilateral creditors under the G20 Common Framework Debt Treatment. The World Bank noted that the high debt levels and vulnerabilities could worsen, particularly for countries that have lost access to the capital credit market and are in or at risk of debt distress. If not addressed, debt dynamics could escalate into a full-fledged crisis, pushing countries further back. From Accra, Ghana, Paul Frimpong, economist and executive director at the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory, joins me now. Paul, welcome to Business Edge again. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you, and good morning to your viewers.
Thank you. So in real terms, let's first break down the projections that the World Bank has in terms of Ghana's deficits and what that means for the economy and Ghanaians. So it's meant to remain elevated from 2023. For many people, that's business lingo. So in real terms, what does this mean for the Ghanaian economy and Ghanaians?
I think Ghana has been experiencing very difficult times in recent months, and that has seen a lot of fiscal adjustment and a lot of programs being launched by the government of Ghana to sort of win or bring the country back on track before we can even talk about rebuilding. And so we've seen a number of new initiatives and programs, including going on record 17 times to the IMF to help sort the situation and help the country to gain more like confidence from investors. And if you look at it, Ghana is among countries on the continent that are suffering from very high debt related issues. And mostly this is more of a country that is illiquid in terms of its ability to pay its debts to the creditors, whether domestic or externally. And so the government has been on a lot of programs. As I said earlier, we've gone through a series of debt restructuring. I'm sure we'll get deeper into that conversation later on. And of course, as I did mention, through the IMF program that the country has gone on. Earlier, the rhetoric was that the country will be able to see itself through these challenges. Earlier, it was more of these are challenges, not crises. And then now the conversation moved from just a mere challenge to crisis, real crisis that require that each citizen needs to tighten his or her belt, because we're going to be going through a series of difficult moments. We've seen inflation in the country rising to record almost 60% and one of the highest in the world. At a point, Ghana was at the level just above Sri Lanka. And we all know the story of Sri Lanka when it comes to economic difficulties and debt-related issues in recent years, dating back to last year, becoming one of the most likely debt default countries in the world. Ghana was next in line after Sri Lanka. So we've been in a very difficult and tight position. When you look around, the ordinary citizen is going through a lot. Prices of goods skyrocketing, as I mentioned, 60% record inflation. The currency, got battered, last quarter of last year. Now it's relatively stable because we're now building conversation that is bringing more confidence in the system. Oil prices were skyrocketing in those periods, and now the government even came to deal with debt-related issues domestically. And of course, when it comes to domestic issues, people's investment, savings, future of their kids, their education, their healthcare, everything is at play.
Okay, so everything really is at risk right now for Ghana. But let's look at something else. We see that the 2022 fiscal deficit was well above the targets that's been set. The overall fiscal deficit on a cash basis reached 9.9% of GDP against a target of about 6.7%. But we also saw that Ghana recorded a government budget deficit equal to 12.1% of the country's gross domestic product in 2021. So when you sort of look at the figures and you look at the situation from 2021 leading us into 2022 and now where we are with 2023, are things looking like they can balance out? Was there something that Ghana was doing well that was getting them some good reactions or at least some good responses that we might need to look at implementing or re-implementing and bringing back into the situation Ghana faces now?
Well, I think we were caught up at the wrong time in terms of what the government was trying to do. If you look at the situation that we put ourselves in, what led to that, it was more of we had a fiscal space to get in enough revenue or injection in terms of capital flows. And so the government took advantage of that space, which is what led us to multiple times going to the international capital market, because we had access to the international capital market then, to borrow as much as we can. Unfortunately, we were not at the point of being able to turn around some of this money that came in before we had an issue about COVID-19. And in as much as we do not want to put all the blames on COVID-19, it's really played a key part in what we find ourselves in as a country. And of course, that led to, of course, we also have the Russia-Ukraine, which has to do with food security-related issues. But then again, we realized that we were not disciplined enough to what we are experiencing now. So lack of indiscipline, fiscal indiscipline is what has led us to this point. Having the room or the fiscal space to go to the capital market to get access to funds doesn't mean that every now and then you are into the capital market to borrow, because it has to be related to the strategy, the plan that you have, what kind of investments you're doing, where the money is going to. And guess what? In Ghana, government's budget, you look at government budgets, right? Over 60% of government's revenue is going to payment of recurrent expenditure, right? So it means that there's no value for money here. Look at bringing in money that you have to pay interest on, okay, to be able to offset the kind of expense that you're making. So that's what dug us deeper into this issue. Of course, some of the issues related to the budget got to do with the kind of support that we get from our international partners. So, countries, mostly countries in developing market like Ghana, when you draw a budget, you have an access to other external support to your budget. And when these countries are also going through their own fiscal challenges,
that support gets reduced.
Exactly.
So Paul, you make mention of something that I've heard a lot from Ghanaian analysts we've spoken to, and that's about this issue of fiscal indiscipline. So what exactly is this indiscipline that seems to be happening in Ghana? Not one, not two, not three economists and financial analysts have mentioned this issue. It's probably, unfortunately, an issue that many African economies can relate to, this issue of fiscal indiscipline. But in the Ghanaian context, how do you see that working?
So it's simple, for us, it's simply a matter of biting more than you can chew situation. Right? So you have government assuming so much responsibilities and paying so much, but has no plans of trying to see where all those funds are going and what they are coming out of it. Right? If you look at, we've mentioned over and over, look at the size of the government now. This has been going on, a lot of debate, a lot of conversation, even at the parliament, and of course in the public space about the size of government, right? Because the larger the size of government, the more you have to spend on recurrent expenditure. So if you're not disciplined enough to actually reduce the size of the government and rather keeps on adding on and adding on, that is fiscal discipline. Of course, you believe you have the means to pay all this recurrent expenditure at the expense of the ordinary Ghanaian, which is not good. So that is one. And of course, if you look at the structure of government in Ghana now, there are a lot of agencies and ministries and departments that, according to law, they must also be involved in raising revenue, which is what we call internally generated revenue. And over the period, with all the government spending in all these agencies and departments and ministries, there's no corresponding revenue that is being generated from these quarters. So that is also another level of fiscal discipline. And of course, like I said, some of the investment that has been done also does not connect to any sort of plan. In Ghana, recent past, I did even a paper on this about the government in the area of sports. We've seen the government of Ghana investing hugely in what we call artificial turf or astroturfs across many
stadiums
districts without any corresponding program of real sports development, that this is what we want to do, that in the next 5 years, Ghana, we want to be earning through export of sporting talent, to the tune of this. So there's no clear plan for some of these expenditures, just more of gaining political traction by saying that I've just made this stadium, this astroturf here, so people can play on it. You go there, you see, even sometimes go and see kids and social gatherings there, funeral grounds, and all of that.
Okay.
But that's not the plan. So these are what we call fiscal discipline. There has to be a value for money, and that is when you can do that, and then you say you are disciplining yourself fiscally.
Okay, so Paul, let's look at the options that Ghana has before it currently. We know that Ghana has, as much as we know, gotten to a point where it's just a few more things to get that $3 billion from the International Monetary Fund, which has asked for a few things, meetings with bilateral creditors as well. We also know that Ghana has approached the G20 for the Common Framework Debt Treatment, which is a slow process, and it's a process that's been criticized on its own. We've seen the finance minister also travel to China to have conversations with China, which is a very large, of course, holder of Ghana's debt as it is right now. But right now, it seems, since all those movements, things simply have stalled. There's been no further progress, whether it's with the framework or with the IMF deal or the bailouts. Is there any updates? Has there been any progress in the past few days or weeks that would let you think that there's finally going to be some light at the end of the tunnel and we'll see an end to this situation soon?
Yeah, I foresee something happening, but of course, there's a lot of, when it comes to the issue of Ghana and some countries in the region about the debt restructuring, especially the external debt restructuring, because we've successfully done the domestic restructuring. And the external one, of course, is not even about the commercial. The commercial creditors actually owns over 80% of the whole debt portfolio. The rest is the one that we're doing the bilateral. So even the case of China, it's just about 3%. Ghana's debt is going to China, just 3%. Just that China is the single largest, bilateral creditor, but it's just 3% of the external debt portfolio of Ghana. There's a lot of geopolitics at play here when it comes to that, and that is where earlier on I did mention that yes, Ghana is going to see some positive development in terms of what they're trying to achieve with China, but that's not going to be the end of it. It's going to drag on. The deadline of March, getting the facility in by end of March, I already knew that's not going to be met because already getting access to China alone took some time to be able to even arrange and bonus, because it was a heated moment, because it's more you owe me money, but you're waiting for somebody to come and tell you to come to me to forgive you my debt when there are other things that we're looking at. So that situation really was very uncomfortable and actually put Ghana at risk, and that actually dragged our chances of meeting the March deadline. As of now, it will be very difficult to say that we're going to be getting something, let's say April. Give or take, we should be looking at somewhere June, July before we can get some facility coming in from the IMF, because they still insist that we need to get a deal with bilateral partners, especially the Paris Club. And I'm hoping that the conversation that's going to happen at G20 in India can help, and debt, I'm sure debt restructuring and debt relief is going to be on the agenda very much because of what's happening around the world.
Yeah.
Hopefully that can also speed the conversation.
Okay.
But for me, I think when you look at, like I said earlier, about 80% of the external debt is commercial lenders, and most of these sit in Wall Street or London or in Hong Kong or in Dubai. Right? So this is where the big deal is. If we can also get a way to also get a deal with such commercial lending, that can also help. For them, of course, they are in for profit. They went there to borrow at a rate, they expect that you pay them, because they are also private, capital. But
yes,
what is happening around, and of course, they are also committed to a sound and safe, financial system or economy. That's when they can also thrive. So there's a bit of responsibility from their end as well. So with a successful debt restructuring domestically, if we get a deal with the IMF and of course the G20 conversation that's going to happen in terms of bilateral conversation on debt restructuring relief for developing countries that are in distress, I'm sure that can also help Ghana to be able to also have a form of a gateway with the commercial lenders as well. And that can really help.
All right, Paul. All right, before I let you go, there is something I found interesting because the World Bank has noted that these efforts, the efforts in terms of maybe the G20 common framework or even this debt restructuring conversations being had, that they cannot replace a comprehensive and well-coordinated solution for countries in debt distress. And that's it. There has to be coordination. In some instances, some have said Africa has to approach these creditors, which many of us share, as a block. It can't be these individual conversations anymore. But in terms of what the World Bank has said, in about a minute, because we're out of time now, do you think the bank is on the mark in terms of the fact that there must be comprehensive and well-coordinated solutions for countries in distress, particularly African countries? This is going to be a year of African debt distress. Whether many of us default is a different conversation, but we've hit a wall and it's time for us to see if we're turning around or if we're digging through. What do you think?
We do. And of course, I mean, having a very comprehensive domestic program is very key for any country, because relying on yourself in so many ways, being able to build your economy to the level that you can absorb some of these shocks, because the shocks will come, whether we like it or not, and it's been happening over the years. I mean, if you look at, we are still even dealing with the outcome of the 2008 financial crisis. So yes, shocks will come, but if you have a very strong domestic program that focuses on your own internal strengths and weaknesses and identifying the areas of focus. And in Ghana, there's been a lot of research and reports on what we can do as a country, which areas we should stick on, which areas we should focus on domestically to be able to be strong at and build an economy that can absorb shocks as they come. We have those information. I think the bank is right on stressing these points. You cannot stress it enough, that this is the time. I mean, look at all the areas. And going to debt crisis phases. This is not the first time countries in Africa have gone through debt crisis. In Ghana, we went under HIPIC, the highly indebted poor countries, at the time that we were not able to pay our debt, and that's what we're forgiving. Of course, now we've gone past HIPIC, and no country wants to be in a HIPIC zone again. So these conversations are reared its head again and again. Countries in Africa are at the front of it. Look at the countries around the world that are identified as being debt unsustainable. There are 76, 79 countries around the world that are described as debt unsustainability, which means their debt level is about 60% of their GDP. Out of these 76 countries around the world that are deemed as unsustainable, their debts are deemed unsustainable, 26 of them are in Africa. And out of the 76, 23 are labeled as high debt distress countries. All the 33 are from the 26 that are from Africa. And that cannot be the case for the continent anymore.
Yes.
That 76 countries debt unsustainability, 23 high debt risk, and all 23 are African countries, including Ghana, Zambia, and all these countries that we know. So for me, I think it's right on the point that it's about time that countries really, the fact that you have access to capital market, yes, it's exciting. You can go out there, you can bring in the long-term, medium to long-term capital that you need from the private lenders to be able to pay for infrastructure and all of that. It's exciting. But then being able to develop your own domestic program and project that gives you that piece at the base, because you need that base before you can build on from this capital private that comes in. And that is what we are. I believe it's a right call for us to really focus, not always rely on IMF or somebody's coming bailing out.
All right, Paul, I know that this conversation, because that last angle you brought is one of the angles we also need to look at as well. So it's a conversation that has many sides to it. But as I said earlier, this unfortunately looks like the year of African debt distress. And we're going to be talking about more African countries facing the potential of default and distress as the year rides on. Paul Frimpong, economist and executive director at the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.